She felt a scream escape her throat, her body collapsing onto the grassy ground. Next, she found herself with Alrek hovering over her. "It's finished," he spoke briefly, removing something heavy from her skirt. Slowly, she stood, wobbling slightly, and leaned against a nearby tree, staring down at the odd beast with the size of a hound and the shape of a cat. "You killed it?" she whispered in shock. The swordless one nodded solemnly. "There was no other way. Last week, I witnessed it leap on a deer and drink its blood. I knew then the only way to defeat him would be to choke him with my bare hands. I never thought he'd get so close to the wall. It's a miracle from God that you were here," she breathed. "It's not mere chance," he spoke, growing self-aware. "I've been here for more than one night, watching the torches under the trees. The light attracts more than just sharks. It's like watching the northern lights, and when the men sing and drink wine, the sound carries here as though I were among them." He trailed off, focusing on his torn clothes and wiping away drops of blood with his cloak. The sight of his wounds brought her back to reality, and she immediately tore her apron into strips to tend to his wounds with swift precision. Neither of them spoke of the bleeding flesh, understanding the wounds ran as deep as the physical body. Alrek attempted to leave multiple times, but Gudrid knew he needed more than just medical attention. As she worked on his wounds, she pondered on how to heal his soul. Suddenly she saw those empty brown hands and realized how much power they still held. Looking up from where she knelt beside him, she spoke with bravery. "Kinsman, there is little need to tell you what you already know, that Karlsefne would pardon you for this help, but he wouldn't give you his faith, which is what you seek." Though he didn't flinch from her touch on his wounds, the boy winced under her words. "I seek neither his faith nor forgiveness. I plead for you to let me go." She replied, "Not until you've heard me out. I tell you this to show that I speak the truth. The right thing for you is to come back to the group and live as one of the men until fate aligns with you again." She worked silently for a while, feeling his stare on her. After some time he spoke huskily. "It's no use. I have been dishonored." With a hint of scorn she raised her eyes. "Is it true that you killed the Skraeling?" He looked at her sorrowfully. "I thought you would believe in me, kinswoman." "Well, I did until you claimed dishonor. If you didn't do the deed, then how could it taint you?" she replied. Rising up, she laid her palms upon his breast and made him look at her. "Did your hands become helpless because there was no sword in them tonight?" she challenged. "I believe your weapons are stronger, and your eyes are just as quick to watch my peril. Your heart is as brave to help me. In fact, you were twice as brave to come with empty hands. Will you truly ignore the courage and honor you know you have just because you lack the red cloth and the steel that signify it? If you do, you will not be the Alrek Ingolfsson that I hoped my child would be like." As she gazed into his eyes, she sensed a fire that had long been extinguished, rekindle and burn within him. Placing her palms on his breast, she felt him take a deep breath, with no words to refute her boldness. She did not ask for his consent, silently picking up the limp body, urging him to do the same before they make their way towards the gate. As they approached, the clamor of voices and laughter grew louder, causing him to slow down, and she turned to see his face turn red with pain. She did not reach out to hold him, but spoke in a hushed tone, warning him of the consequences of her actions. Watching him cautiously, she accepted that he would enter the camp with her. As they walked, cheers erupted from the defenders of Vinland, as a young figure with a bright mass of yellow fur swung onto his shoulder. The cheering engulfed him, lost amidst the crowd's joyous chaos. Her serene, sugary lips unfurled in contentment. "This initial stride is crucial in achieving a favorable result," she declared. "Should the cosmic powers instantiate any fairness in their cosmic bosoms, they shall ensure the fulfillment of the remainder." Gazing from a distance, she radiated with illustrious luminosity, resembling the lunar orb's radiance upon her. Chapter 17. Showing how the champions broke a thread in the huntsman's net. As Thorhall navigated the boulder-filled trail that led to the shore, he couldn't help but be surprised by what greeted him. He had embarked on a 3-day scouting mission for the sole purpose of catching a glimpse of the ship that he was enamored with. However, the scene that awaited him was not entirely what he had anticipated. The ship had taken on all of its graceful outlines, and was still resting securely on its rollers. The workers continued bustling around it, seemingly unaware of any change. Yet, to the right of it, near a rock that protruded through the gravel, a young brown-haired smith could be seen hammering vigorously at a bar of glowing iron. Though he didn't whistle, he worked with unyielding focus. Bran's voice could be heard over the hum, asking Alrek for his professional opinion on how to move forward. As Thorhall descended the path, deep in thought, he interrupted the conversation with a greeting that was also a question. The brown-haired smith, still focused on his craft, ignored him, and it was Erland the Amiable who answered to the title. "Thorhall, I'm elated that you're back. We've been anxiously waiting for you to return so that you could share the secret of the treasure land you have discovered with Alrek." Thorhall took his time approaching the group, examining the boat's new additions while unwinding seaweed bubbles from his ankle. He finally settled on a boulder, eyeing the smith intently, and asked, "Are you here to stay?" Gard, who was working behind Alrek, responded with a taunt, "Some may believe that he has come back with ill intentions." Erland spoke up to keep the peace. "Gard, if you would be so kind as to collect clams from the beach to ensure our nourishment, it would be much appreciated. No need to return to camp for lunch." Huntsman Gard followed Erland's instructions, but with a noticeable hint of suspicion and a lingering glance back at the group. After some time, Gard spoke up in a blunt tone. "The southern and western regions of this land are inhabited by dwarfs, skilled in metalwork. Turfing was forged by such creatures. You all remember their homes in the gold-bearing mountains." The band responded with admiration and praise for the dwarves' homes, but Thorhall remained focused on Alrek's reaction, waiting for him to express any doubts. However, Alrek seemed fascinated by Gard's information and wondered if the dwarfs Rolf Erlingsson saw on his journey with Leif the Lucky could have been the same creatures Gard just described. Alrek couldn't help but think how rich these dwarves must be. The smith ended his comment with uncertainty in his voice, pondering what other mysteries of this land remained to be discovered. The huntsman reclined and struck his knee with great enthusiasm. "Your comrades are wise to value your cleverness above all else," he exclaimed. "This idea had never occurred to me before, but it is highly probable. They are so shrewd that it would be entirely within their nature to disguise themselves as scralings to spy upon outsiders. It's not like they are fond of outsiders, mind you. Do you recall how it was a dwarf who caused my shipwreck at Keel Cape?" "No, that is a story you have not relayed to us," cried the group eagerly. The huntsman looked at them indulgently. "It's not much of a tale, really. It started when I pried too deeply into an old man's secrets and had to run for my life. If I hadn't abandoned the boat with the bow towards the water and oars in their locks, we would have been doomed. We were barely out of sight of land when the dwarf man caught up with us on the shore." He paused and surveyed the group. "Do you remember when King Skiold blew on a passing ship, causing the boom to fall on Eystein by the tiller?" he asked. They nodded impatiently, while Alrek confirmed, "I believe that to be true. I once met a Finnish sailor who could change the wind by adjusting his cap." "You've seen so much of the world," the huntsman marveled. "It would be a great misfortune for you to miss out on this opportunity to see even more wonders. Now, to continue, the dwarf used a similar tactic, but in a different way. Instead of blowing on us, he raised a mighty storm by flapping his cloak, and the water grew into an enormous wall. I had often wondered what it would be like to be where a thunderstorm starts, and that day I found out. The water rose behind us with a thunderous torrent and carried us past the Vinland Bay until we struck the keel bar. The boat shattered, and the other 3 men went under. Only by Thor's grace did I survive. Hallard was not a willing victim of drowning. I recall having only one boot when you discovered me. I perceived something tugging at the other boot, so I kicked it off thinking a shark got hold of it. Now I realize it was Hallard grabbing it. He may have been resentful that I did not help him, causing his spirit to come back and haunt me. That would be how Hallard would react, being the kind of man that he was so notoriously dependent on others," Brand said scornfully. Then turning to Thorhall, he said, "Could you please show us the chain again? Alrek needs to fully understand the great things that lie ahead of us." Thorhall obliged with pleasure. He relinquished the bag around his neck and laid it open for all to see. The group of Vikings gathered around Thorhall, ignoring the ugly one hustling in the background, mesmerized by the sparkle of the gems embedded in the chain that were blue as the sea, and others that appeared like ignited pearls or even stars. Alrek extended his hand to hold the necklace, relishing the weight of it. "I have looted treasures from the palaces of kings, but nothing compares to this," Alrek said in amazement. "Our luck had brought us to you that day on the Wonder Strands. I remember you telling Fast that you did not reveal your secret before the chiefs because of your fear of power being taken from you. I suppose you share the secret with us because we can come up with a ship." Erland gazed up, surprised at the unexpected cordiality of the huntsman. It had never occurred to him to consider the reason for it before. Angling his gaze under knitted brows, the huntsman smoothed his words despite his rough demeanour. "Now you do injustice to your comrade's valour and accomplishments," he began. But he stopped as he noticed one of Alrec's eyes close in a good-natured mockery. "When do you intend to set sail?" Swordless brought the conversation back to its original point. The huntsman reached out and retrieved his chain. "You must ask your chief," he replied. There was a clear resentment in his tone as he spat out the title, making the amiable one answer before he could be asked. "I think it will take approximately 5 more days to complete outfitting, and then 2 more to acquire food. If we have a fair wind, we should be able to depart on the 10th day. Alrec slowly lowered his hammer, which he had raised to return to his work. "Perhaps you are forgetting about the Skraelings," he said. "The hunters not seeing anything does not mean much. Leif Erikson's men did not see any dwarves before they ambushed them. It is a clear signal that retaliation is imminent when a man is found dead, face down. They can arrive any day, and if we are out hunting for gold when our fellow campers are fighting for survival, our reward will be small, even if we do return with—" The huntsman arose to his towering height and snarled, "Are you the chief?" That was the 3rd time he had rubbed salt into the wound, arousing a fiery blaze in Alrec's cheeks and sending sparks into his eyes as he turned. "No, I am not the chief," he responded straightforwardly. "But as a free man, I have the right to voice my opinion in decision-making matters, and I can assure you that my voice will be heard, even if you attempt to cast all the spells you know." Perhaps the huntsman did try to cast a spell, for he immediately turned towards those who had followed his every whim, as if they were charmed birds. "What about you?" he hissed. "Will you delay this opportunity for riches and instead fight for the lawmen, who doubted your oaths and showed no respect for your high seat?" The chorus answered him loudly, "No!" With his fierce demeanour, Brand made himself stand out in the crowd. Let the Skraelings carve blood eagles in Karlsefne. He likely regretted his outburst, as it only earned him a withering look from the swordless rather than praise. "You speak foolishly," the young Viking chided, "to seek revenge for personal grievances during wartime. True soldiers do not abandon their comrades in battle, no matter their feelings towards their chief. No blade could scrape off the stain of such cowardice." The huntsman's green eyes blazed like the eyes of a Vinland elk at bay. Turning to face Erlend, who stood silently by, he struck again. "And what of you, who call yourself chief? Do you have any power at all?" Erlend's handsome face flushed with embarrassment. "It seems I was mistaken in thinking the name belonged to me," he replied uneasily. Alrec, crimson-faced, stumbled over his words in an attempt to apologize. Erlend silenced him by clamping a hand over his mouth. "You misunderstand me," the amiable one said sternly. "You were not out of line for speaking up. You were merely stepping into the place that belongs to you. I am unfit to rule over anything. Leaving would have been a disloyal and unforgivable act, and I would have become a Nithing. I know of no better outcome than for you to assume your rightful place as chief and save me from my own incompetence." He turned to address the assembled champions. "You cheered when I offered to give up the chiefship before. I will be disappointed if you do not do so now." Brand eagerly offered the first cheer, attempting to make up for his earlier mistake. Gard, having just arrived with his burden on his back, added a deep roar. Soon all the champions were shouting and banging their tools against the ship in lieu of swords and shields. As the clamour subsided, Erlend faced the swordless with a smile tinged with arrogance. "It would be a blow to my pride if you asked me to hold on to what clearly is yours," he declared. After a while, Alrec raised his gaze from the sandy trench his foot had dug. "I would accept it with appreciation, provided that Karlsefne permits it," he replied. This elicited cheers, and everyone reached out to congratulate him. Save for 2, that is. Brand and Gard the Ugly stood to the side, shifting uncomfortably and unwilling to approach. The swordless himself was hesitant when he finally approached them, and his cheeks took on their awkward shade. But he offered his hand, which they eagerly shook. The crowd roared in approval. As the commotion died down, the huntsman turned and strode away. His initial suspicion, simmering as he descended the path, had hardened into bitter conviction as he stomped back up it. Chapter 18. Concerning a grim bargain between the lawman and Alrec. "And I shall seek out Gudrid," spoke Alrec, as he and Erlend completed their morning meal, "whose counsel is wise in all things, with your permission to be tardy for my tasks." "You have my leave for anything you require," answered Erlend. The amiable one and all the champions who were not bound to serve in the kitchen strolled through the lush green forest to the awaiting ship. Swordless Alrek took his leave and strolled past the idle tables and groups of servants with plates, making his way towards Karlsefne's tent. Today, small Snorri tumbled about in the clover, bellowing loudly for his mother to come play with him. This provided Alrek with a good rationale to wait for her. He collapsed on the grass, changing the cries into laughter by playfully stumbling the crier every time he started up again. This succeeded as Gudrid came to the door, a piece of sewing in her hand, surveying the area with inquisitive blue eyes. "Oh, that's the reason he stopped screaming," she said with a sigh of relief. "As long as he's crying, I know he's safe. Kinsman, you are a loiterer to be lying on the ground when everyone else is hard at work." Alrek shook the clovers from his hair and took a seat. He would have stood, but the frowner had crawled over his feet. "I'm only waiting to ask for your guidance," he said. "I've been searching for the chance to speak alone with Karlsefne for 2 days now. I yearn for his justice." Gudrid, stepping outside, situated herself on the front step, jabbing holes into her work with her bronze needle. She spoke after some thought. "Justice is a loaded weapon to challenge unless you are certain you stand steadfast on your own 2 feet, kinsman." His response was immediate. "I stand firm." And the severity of his tone was in striking contrast to the mildness of his grip as he held the frowner in its assent. Observing them, Gudrid's anxious expression transformed into a tender grin. "Now I am certain of your innocence," she stated, "just by observing how you interact with the youngster." Alrek smirked, denying her assumptions. "Why, that means nothing," he retorted. Gudrid fidgeted with the clovers beneath her foot. Even Karlsefne made the same choice. Think about it. Perhaps a man's mind is similar to a bat, which rejects the sun's warmth and prefers to exhibit its abilities in the darkness. I hypothesize that the very audacity that convinces me of your purity will seem like another deceit of your unruly lineage in the eyes of the lawman. Imagine how they describe a seal in Greenland. When it tries to swim against a violent stream, it has to give up and become trapped. Cousin, she said, approaching him and squeezing his arm, be confident in your strength." He concurred, leaning in to kiss her hand, conveying his serious disposition without words. She clued in and ceased worrying. Gudrid stood up, whispering calmly, "I can only aid you in one way. Karlsefne is roaming the grounds while the men harvest. I didn't give him lunch since the bread was old. I plan to send a slave with the food. You have the option to deliver the meal and get Karlsefne away from the rest." "That arrangement works for me, and I'm grateful," the man responded. She nodded, rushing inside to hurry the bread-making process. Alrek lifted the frowner onto his shoulder and strolled around in the sunshine that had blanketed the camp, calming the bustling morning's commotion into a quiet hum. Enchanted by the gentle rhythm and slow movement, Snorri's blond head began to droop, swaying and bobbing until it finally rested heavily on the bearer's brown locks. Gudrid received a bundle of warm sweetness in return for the basket and ale skin she had brought out. "It's almost like gathering up a jellyfish," she chuckled as she took hold of him. However, Alrek's smile was faint in response. He had been contemplating as he paced, fully aware of the weight of what he was about to do. "I express my gratitude," he said softly for a second time, and left her. Outside, in the vast open world beyond the wall, it seemed as if everything was coaxing a smile. The expanse of woodland, into which the grove deepened, enticed with the melody of hidden brooks, carried the scent of pine trees, and welcomed with abundant berry thickets in black, red, and blue, just like the river that eventually emerged from the woods. The elms on the riverbank proudly displayed entwined grapevines, while dragonflies adorned the rushes at the edge, gleaming like precious gems in the sunlight. The river itself wore a wide grin. A dull anger overcame him when he realized his spirits were too heavy to respond with joy. "If this continues, I might become a coward," he muttered. "I was not quick enough in making up my mind." A little further along the way he reached a small stream, where he noticed a water snake struggling with a half-swallowed frog on one of the mossy stepping stones. However, he did not attempt to free the victim. "It's better to die whole than to live crippled," he grimly reasoned, and continued on his path. Now it seemed a very short distance until he arrived at the broad, sunlit valley, its fragrant basin covered in ripening hay. Men were tossing it around with jests and laughter, as if it were a crop grown effortlessly and without care. Spotting him, they greeted him with good-natured banter, and he mechanically raised his hand as his eyes searched for the lawman's figure dressed in blue. He was not to be found among the scattered groups in the valley, nor could he be found alone in the open. However, Alrek spotted the lawman under the shade of a willow tree in the middle of a meadow. Amused, he moved forward and thought if finding him under a tree was a bad omen. The lawman watched Alrek approach, still as a stone with his chin resting on his fist. When Alrek saluted him, the lawman answered sternly, "I shall know better how to receive you when I hear your purpose in taking this service on yourself." Alrek explained that Gudrid allowed him to do so for a private conversation with the lawman. It seemed that Karlsefne relaxed a little after hearing Gudrid's involvement, and that there was a great reason for her to aid him. He was grateful to Alrek and wanted to hear his purpose. The boy sat up proudly as Karlsefne unclenched his hand before his eyes and spoke of Alrek's resemblance to his father on the day of his condemnation. Although he hated the deeds, he loved the doer. He begged Alrek to throw himself upon his mercy and to break free from the defiance that would shut him out from all that would bring him good. Alrek's heart swelled as Karlsefne spoke with a note of yearning love, and he had to speak harshly and briefly to keep himself together. "It is difficult to know how to respond, as your offer is not something I require. My purpose in coming here was to receive justice. If I have violated your laws, then I should suffer a just punishment. Conversely, if I have not, then I have a right to continue living with my honor intact. If you are aware that I am the one who killed the Skraeling, then I request that you tie me to this tree and shoot me," Alrek said. As the northern lights fade from a rock and leave no warmth in their wake, the glow departed from the face of the lawman. "Do you truly desire death?" he queried. "I would rather die than continue living as I have since your ruling," responded Alrek. A profound silence ensued. When a large fly buzzed near the boy's ear for a brief moment, the sound appeared deafening. Finally the lawman spoke, his voice reminiscent of clanging iron. "Few men dare to confront me with force and overbearing nature, yet you play the game as well as anyone could expect from a son of your father. Although I believe you are guilty, you are correct to assume that I am not confident enough to end your life when you leave it in my hands. Since my assurance is uncertain, I cannot punish you in any way. Your gameplay is tremendous. You have two choices before you. Leave the situation as it is now, securing your safety, allowing you to regain your respectability in the future, or reclaim your lost honors according to your demands. However, if this case reappears in my high seat, and even a feather's weight of evidence is presented against you, your life will be forfeit. The lengthy, cautious route is generally not one chosen by young people, as it takes much travel and failure to arrive there." The youthful Viking answered instantly, "I will take my rewards and the threat." Rising, the lawman saluted him with a chief's gesture. "As you wish. Today, in the hall, I will restore your honors before everyone. In this matter and those that follow, it shall be as you decide." With his hand held high, he prevented the boy from thanking him. In compliance with the signal, the principal champion ceased and inclined his head in silence. Yet his tawny cranium was held aloft as he departed, and his gaze were twin luminous orbs of expectation. Chapter 19. Relating the adventure with the men of the forest. As the sun began to rise, a thin veil of mist draped over the land like a shroud. The song of birds was still scarce and tired, as Hjalmar Thickskull strolled down the grassy slope towards the sandy shore. He had recently traded fishing in the river for fishing in the bay, which held a flat island resembling a lily pad. With his fishing gear on his back and a tune on his lips, he approached his boat, giving the horizon a quick scan. Suddenly, his tune turned into a scream as he sprinted back up the slope to the gate, nearly deafening the man standing there. "Skraelings! They're coming in droves around the long point!" Hjalmar shouted. The guards repeated the message, still in shock, but an Icelander who happened to be nearby heard and sprinted towards Karlsefne's booth. The hounds that were sleeping under the trees bounded to their feet and ran in pursuit, barking excitedly. Heads popped out of every door Hjalmar passed, bombarding him with questions. The news travelled rapidly, like a wildfire burning through dry brush. Upon arriving at the chief of the champion's doorstep, the Icelander sheathed his sword, which he had been polishing with great pride mere moments before, and took one step towards the gate before quickly changing course. He realized that a faster way to confirm the news would be to climb a large pine tree located on a small knoll. With agility and speed, he scaled the trunk and made his way from one branch to the next, using them like steps. Eventually his head popped out through the last layer of needles, giving him a clear view of the bay. Hjalmar had not lied. The sparkling expanse of water was now dotted with dark skin-boats. They were headed eastward, encircling the longest of the capes and creating the illusion of a dark tide washing over the land. As the sword-bearer's throat tightened, he considered making a quick escape. But something caught his eye on the riverbank, the passing of something dark. Slowly and deliberately, he lowered his head under the tree's green canopy, hanging by his arms as he intently watched the movement.